Good night and welcome to the very first In Touch program for 2015. I'm your host, Juste Emmanuel. I'm very excited to be with you tonight. It has been a long vacation, a long break, one that I welcome. I am rested and I am ready for the task ahead. I note that I have received a number of messages today. Many persons are excited that I'm back. Some are not too happy, I can tell. But we are in for an exciting 2015. The Prime Minister addressed the nation on Sunday, and he outlined in that address what the focus of the government of St. Lucia will be for this period. He also spoke to some of our achievements and our struggles in 2014. In that address, the Prime Minister spoke to the very topical issue of the fuel price adjustments. Since the reduction of the prices at the pumps that happened on the 12th of January, there has been a lot of discussion, a lot of debate, a lot of information has been thrown at you. Some of that information has been very misleading and erroneous. I need not tell you where that part of the information is coming from. Many persons have expressed opinions, differing views on how the government should move forward, whether we should revert to the market pass-through mechanism, whether the government can find another means of calculating the fuel prices at the end of the day. The Prime Minister did indicate in his statement that the government may very well have to review the process for the time being, if we realize that the prices are declining or continue to decline at a sharp rate. But for now, we are using the modified pass-through mechanism, and that was introduced in 2012. Tonight, my guest is an authority. He is within the Ministry of Finance. In fact, he is the Director of the Research and Policy Unit that is within the Department of Finance. And they are responsible for collecting that information, for analyzing the data and presenting what would guide the decisions of the Cabinet of Ministers as it relates to the fuel prices. And so he will share with us what happens within that department, how the information is gathered, explain to us what exactly is the modified pass-through mechanism. And of course, we will dispel some of the information that has been circulating through the media and in various quarters as to what is actually involved in the calculation of the prices and what exactly we are dealing with. And so I welcome Mr. Embert Juste. Thank you for being my first guest in 2015. And there is a lot that we have to discuss tonight. And I know that you are ready, because this is your job. This is your domain. So welcome to the show. I want to start off by asking you about your department, because for many persons, it is only now that we are having the discussion on the fuel prices that they are hearing about a research and policy unit within the Department of Finance. What really do you do? Do you simply collect information on fuel prices, or is it more than that? I'm sure it's more than that.
Yes, Jadia. Good night, Jadia, and good night to viewers. As you indicated, Jadia, the Research and Policy Unit in the Ministry of Finance is basically the main macroeconomic unit in the entire government service. And we basically we do analysis, we do research, we provide advice to the government, particularly to the Minister for Finance, as well as to his Cabinet of Ministers. We undertake a whole range of duties, including monitoring the performance of the economy, giving advice to the government on various policy initiatives, looking at issues, for example, on tax policy, expenditure policy, debt management. We look at the performance of what they call the real economy, that is the various sectors in the economy: tourism, agriculture, manufacturing, construction, name it. We have economists that are assigned to specific sectors in the economy. And as I indicated, we monitor very closely the performance of those sectors, and we provide the government with policy advice with respect to various forms of interventions that the government may wish to consider with respect to adjusting policies.
But of course, at the end of the day, the decisions would lie within the Cabinet of Ministers and well, the Minister for Finance, yes. But you would provide that information. The discussion has been ongoing, and I'm sure you've heard some of the issues that have been raised as it relates to fuel prices in St. Lucia. We have moved from the market pass-through mechanism, where there was a monthly adjustment, and we are now at the modified pass-through mechanism where prices are adjusted on a 3-month basis. What exactly is a modified pass-through mechanism? If you can explain to us in simple terms what it is and how the prices are calculated at the end of the day for our petroleum products.
Yes. So basically the modified pass-through was first announced by the Prime Minister and also Minister for Finance in his budget address in 2012. And the modified pass-through became effective on the 6th of August 2012. And as you correctly indicated, we moved away from the monthly price adjustments at the pump to a 3-month price adjustment. So the prices were being adjusted every quarter. And basically, as the Prime Minister mentioned in his budget address, the main reason given for the change in policy was for price stability, because it was felt at the time that prices were being adjusted every month, and that didn't bode very well for the economy in terms of predictability and price stability, and also for the government revenue as well. So a policy decision was taken by the government in 2012 to move away from the monthly adjustment to the 3-month adjustment. Now, I must indicate to you that I've been listening to the debate being given with respect to the change in policy from the monthly to the quarterly.
Yeah.
And I must say that there are advantages and disadvantages when you compare the two systems. It is true, and persons have been saying that the monthly price adjustments would better reflect the reduction in prices on the global market, oil prices on the global market. But it is also equally true that if oil prices were to increase for whatever reason, that increase would also be reflected at the pump as well. Now, you know that oil prices by its very nature is very volatile. I mean, any unforeseen event, for example, increase in geopolitical tensions in the Middle East, could spike a rapid reversal of fortunes, and it could cause oil prices to increase. So it's a very volatile product. The prices of that product is very volatile. So, so the reduction in oil prices, as we see, would have a benefit to the consumer if we move to the monthly. But it is also equally true that if the oil prices suddenly escalates, that would also be reflected at the pump as well. So there is some benefit with respect to the 3-month, because it
well, the
allows.
benefits seem to be if prices are increasing.
Right.
And
yes,
it's
yes,
the flip side.
Yes, yes. So that now prices are low, and those countries with the more regular price adjustments would benefit from the lower prices.
Like Grenada.
Grenada, St. Kitts and Dominica, etc. But if prices were to increase, their prices would be higher, while ours would remain low, because we have a longer period of price adjustment. So there are advantages and disadvantages in both systems. I think one need to weigh, both positions and look at it, in a very analytical point of view, and to come up with some kind of, basically to look at both sides of the argument. But basically, you've just been hearing one side of the argument, but nobody is looking at the flip side of it, which is when prices
increase.
Because it is not expected that prices would remain low for a very, very long time. I mean, we know that it's coming down right now. It is about $45, $46 a barrel on the international market. Normally, at this time of the year, oil prices tend to be seasonally low. But going into the summer months, that is, May, June, July, oil prices normally increases because of the increased demand, particularly in the U.S., because of the summer season. A lot of people take vacation and so on, and there's normally a huge increase in demand. So seasonally, prices will tend to increase, but we don't expect it to rise to the extent, to the level, that it was previously. Based on what the analysts are saying, they expect by year-end for oil prices to increase, but somewhere in the region of $60, $65 on the international market, but not above 100 as it was last year.
Do you think it is reasonable that the consumer would expect that once you begin to see changes in the price of crude oil, on the international market, that there would be immediate changes in the prices of the petroleum products, such as the gasoline and the diesel? And
yes, that's a very important question, because persons are under the misconceived idea that, you know, because oil prices are below $50 a barrel, you should see an immediate impact in terms of the prices at the pump. And that is not correct. There are several reasons for that. The prices that are quoted on the international market is crude oil prices. Now, crude oil, it's the main product that is used for producing gasoline, LPG, kerosene, and the various products. Whereas there is some correlation between the movement in crude oil prices and the prices of those products, but there's some level of transformation that is made from crude oil into the finished product. Number one, there are significant costs involved in terms of the cost to the refinery in refining the product from crude into the finished product. There's also a time difference, so that the prices that are quoted on the international market is based on the futures market. Okay, the oil is traded on the futures market, so that the prices that would be quoted today would not be reflected in terms of the transaction until, you know, 2-3 months down the road, when the contracts are actually being paid for. So, because persons engage in hedging, a certain amount of hedging, so that when prices are low, they would enter into a contract, and then if prices increase, they would benefit from the differential in prices. So in our case, well, let's go back to the places like the US. The time lag between the international oil prices and the time it is reflected at the pump is about 6 weeks. Okay, so if oil prices, you know, were to be about $50, let's assume today, that $50 on the international market would be reflected at the pumps in the US about 6 weeks later. In the case of St. Lucia and most Caribbean countries, it is a bit longer. Number one, most of our oil comes from Trinidad, from Petrotrain in Trinidad. And you know, Trinidad has its own cost, you know, situation with respect to how the prices are being arrived at. Okay, so as I indicated earlier, while there is a correlation between the movement in international crude oil prices and the retail prices of diesel and gasoline and those finished products, there is a huge time lag between the changes in international prices and the prices that is reflected at the pump, as well as there are differences in terms of the cost structure, because obviously there will be significant cost involved in refining the product.
I want to look at the cost structure, because a lot has been said about the cost structure. In fact, the leader of the UWP suggests that there are hidden taxes, and that the government of St. Lucia is not very transparent in terms of making information available to the public as to how, at the end of the day, we come up with a retail price of $13.65. I just want to tell our viewers that we will be putting up some information on the screen, because we are dealing with figures, and it can become a little bit burdensome when you're dealing with figures. You may not necessarily remember everything that is said. So we have prepared some slides. The information came from the Ministry of Finance, well, in fact, from Mr. Segis's department, and so we'll be putting up some slides on the screen so that you can follow the discussion as we move forward. And so we'll put up the first one, which is the current fuel prices, so that we can discuss the breakdown of the fuel prices, that cost structure. Right. In fact, let us just deal with a direct question. It is suggested that at this time, fuel prices, gasoline, for example, should be less than $10 at the pumps. What exactly is that price build-up? How did we get to that $13.65 at the end of the day?
Okay, as viewers can see on the screen, we have a template here, a table, which shows the various fuel products and the price build-up of each fuel product. So let us start off by looking at unleaded gasoline per gallon. So this is the price build-up. If you start off with what we call the CIF, cost, insurance, and freight. This is the cost that is incurred by the importer. So the importer brings in the product from Petrotrain in Trinidad, and when it arrives in St. Lucia, okay, and this is the price that they pay in terms of the cost and insurance, and freight. Now, how is this figure arrived at? For example, gasoline, as you could see, is $8.66 a gallon. That $8.66 a gallon is actually an average, a simple average, and we will speak about it later in another slide.
Yes.
Where we can see for every shipment. Now remember, since we are operating under a 3-month pass-through, since those prices became effective on the 12th of January 2015, the simple average of the CIF would have been for the preceding 3 months. In other words, between the period October to December 2014. And as I indicated, we'll show it to you later in a different slide, where you can see the actual CIF price for every shipment over that period, the 3-month period. So it's really a simple average. Now, how do we actually collect that information?
Yes.
When the shipment arrives in St. Lucia, the Customs Department is responsible for monitoring the delivery of that product to St. Lucia. So they would have what they call a bulk officer, okay? That is a customs officer who is assigned to monitoring fuel, and he or she would be actually by the ship or at the port where the ship is delivering the product to measure the actual volume of fuel product that is delivered to St. Lucia. And the importer, whether it's Sol or Rubis, because these are the two main importers, they will provide the information to the Customs Department for tax purposes in terms of the CIF price.
So it is not a situation where the importer would email information to the department and decide whatever the price is and whenever.
No, this is information that is provided by the importer to the Customs Department for tax purposes. Because obviously, any product, any goods that is being imported into the country, whether it's fuel, whether it's motor cars, whether it's rice flour, whatever, it has to, there are taxes that are applicable, right? So the Customs Department would have to charge its duties, excise tax, import duty, service charge, etc. So, and this information is derived from an invoice, okay? An invoice would be processed and submitted to the Customs Department to verify that the information that is being provided by the importer is in fact correct, right? And we actually get copies of those invoices to ensure that the information is correct, and that is the information that is used to input into the spreadsheet to arrive at the CIF price. But as I indicated, later on we will actually show the CIF price per shipment for the various products.
Sure.
So this is how we arrive at the CIF. And as you can see, continuing, we have the excise tax, which is fixed at $2.50 a gallon. We have the service charge. Now the service charge is calculated at 5% of the CIF value. Okay. So if you take 5% of 866, you will get 43 cents, which is what is shown here. And well, when you add those three components, that is the CIF, the excise tax, and the service charge, you get a total landed cost of $11.59 per gallon.
So if the landed cost of unleaded gasoline is $11.59 per gallon, how then would it be possible for, because we've not yet dealt with the company margin, which would be the wholesalers, which would be we have not dealt with the retail margin, which would be the gas stations and so on. So how then would it be possible to sell that fuel or that gasoline that landed at a cost of $11.59 at $9 or $10 as was suggested?
Well, as you can see, it's impossible except if you deny the government of any revenue and deny the importers and the dealers the margin, which is not feasible, not practicable. So I mean, the numbers speak for itself. So the fact that you have those things in place, you have the taxes in place, and you have the margins in place, this is what it is, and there's no possibility that it can be below what is shown here. And again, I must stress, this is based on a 3-month average.
3
okay?
months, yeah.
And we'll speak about that later in the program.
Sure.
Looking at the various approaches.
Sure.
So as you can see, the company margin is calculated at $1.01, and these are negotiated margins. The importers would have negotiated those margins with the government. okay, over a given period of time, as well as the retailers, which is set at $1.05 a gallon. And of course, when you add those, you arrive at the retail price of $13.65. That is what the consumers of gasoline would pay at the pump.
So as it stands, government only collects revenue from gasoline and diesel because I see that the excise tax is
looking at the other products, there's very little revenue. In fact, there's no revenue from the kerosene, none from the bulk LPG. There's zero revenue from the 100-pound LPG. However, for the 22-pound and the 20-pound LPG, those two products are being subsidized by the government. The 22-pound by $15.30, which is what, it's 70 cents here, but it's per pound. Okay, because you're talking about a 22-pound cylinder. When you multiply by 22, you get about $15.30, which is the amount that the government subsidizes this particular product for every cylinder. So every time somebody walks into a shop and purchases a 22-pound or a 20-pound cylinder, government actually pays the importer $15 and $14.26 in the case of the 20-pound cylinder. So this is coming at tremendous cost to the government.
If we can go to the CIF prices, and we will take gasoline, for example, and also to look at the diesel, and again, that information will be placed on the screen so that you can follow the discussion, because there are actual dates,
right.
And that is something that I believe needed to come into the public domain, because again, the allegation was made that we are guessing, that the Ministry of Finance, the government of St. Lucia, is estimating what the CIF price is. And as a consequence of that, we are paying more for fuel than we actually should because the prices are reducing. And so there are two importers of gasoline into St. Lucia. And there you have provided information on the actual CIF prices per shipment coming in for the period under review. And we are looking at, like you indicated, from October
from October
to December.
To December. Now, there must be a cutoff date, okay? And there are several reasons for that. Whereas it's 3 months, October to December, the cutoff date would be, well, in the case, we are looking at this particular case, and the cutoff date was the 12th of December. That's the last shipment. The last shipment was received on the 12th of December, as you can see here,
yes,
in the second table. So this is the actual dates which the companies would have received the gasoline, and these are the CIF prices they would have paid for each shipment. And as I indicated, this would have been verified by the receipt of the invoices through the Customs Department. And we get the average. Now, obviously, you know, there are two companies, so you need to get the average between those two companies. So for the first company, the average over the period would be $8.76, and for the second company, the period over the average would be, so
the
average during the period
yes,
would be $8.56. So,
and so this is how we arrive at the $8.66.
So taking a simple average between $8.76 and $8.56 would give you $8.66, and this is the figure that we used for determining the CIF of that particular product for the period.
And just to simplify it a little bit, because I tend to get the feeling that there are some persons who are confusing average with estimates.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, some persons have even gone to the extent of suggesting that we use a weighted average, and I'll explain that, meaning that to give a greater weight to the more recent imports, the more recent shipment, and a lower weight to the earlier shipment. And, you know, they are saying that perhaps that will assist in better reflecting the retail, better reflecting the actual import price. But this does not necessarily work. I mean, we have looked at it in great detail, and it doesn't necessarily work. Because at the end of the day, the importer's margin would be eroded, and you do not want that to happen. I mean, we have had instances a couple of years ago where when international oil prices was escalating, that is 2011, 2012, for example, and the importers' margins were being seriously eroded. Okay, notwithstanding the fact that we have a guaranteed margin of $1.01 in the case of gasoline, they were actually making less than that, and that was because the price they are selling to the retailer is fixed, but guess what? The price they're buying from Trinidad fluctuates. And in that particular year, it was actually increasing rapidly. So they were making less than what was supposedly being guaranteed. And you know, so we had a situation where what is called a CIF variation, where there was significant variation between what was guaranteed and what they were actually making. And therefore we had to come to an arrangement to set it off against, you know, whatever surpluses they have been making when prices are going down.
And I noticed the same for diesel in that, well, there was one shipment in October for one of the companies, and the other companies had 3 shipments, right. And then we found the average of that.
Right.
I note too, as was reflected in the CIF prices of the gasoline, that in early October, the CIF was higher, as opposed to late October, November, and December. And so we are actually seeing the reduction being reflected as, you know, as time progressed and we imported.
Yes. And that is, sorry for interjecting, and that is really reflecting, because as I said to you, there's a strong correlation between the movement in international prices and the price that we pay to Petrotrain in Trinidad, because that's where most of the fuel is being sourced. You know, but there may not necessarily be a perfect one-to-one relationship. There are certain nuances that might be unique to the company in Trinidad that might not exactly mirror the international prices, but largely they move in the same direction. So you're correct. There's been a consistent reduction in the import price between October and December of 2014.
Again, on the CIF price, I must ask that information, not because I doubt what you are presenting tonight, but because the question is on the minds of many of our viewers. When we look at the CIF prices being reflected at some of our neighboring islands, for example, we are seeing lower CIF prices. In fact, today, again, the leader of the United Workers' Party indicated that the CIF price is about $6 and just above $6 and not the $8.66 that the government of St. Lucia is reflecting for gasoline. Is there, I don't even want to ask you if there is any truth to that statement, because I already know that it is incorrect, but just to explain to our viewers the difference in the CIF prices that we've seen reflected, you know, in Dominica and Grenada and so on, who have the market pass-through mechanism as opposed to here.
Those countries, they use a sort of similar approach, but they're not exactly the same, but it's broadly similar. They have differences in the cost structure. So in the price build-up, that sheet that we showed earlier, for example, the tax levels would be different, as well as the margins for both the wholesaler and the retailer. Those would be different from ours. So, and of course, and I think that is the main point. They have a monthly price change as opposed to a quarterly price change, as we do. So the CIF price in those countries would closer reflect what's happening in more recent times with respect to fuel prices. As the prices
are constantly changing.
That is correct. Yeah, there's one point I wanted to make on that.
Sure.
It just slipped me.
Sure. But I wanted to also ask you on, when we discuss the movement within the region, we do it all the time. We compare what the prices would be in St. Lucia versus what is happening in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and so on. Are our prices generally much higher than what is found across the region, or are we usually within an average price range for our petroleum products?
Yes.
I know that the LPG is way off because our government is subsidizing the 20-pound cylinders.
It is heavily subsidized as opposed to the other countries.
But in the other countries, you pay whatever the market price determines, and so the cooking gas and so on is much more expensive than it is in St. Lucia. But when we discuss gasoline and diesel, do our prices usually vary much from what is happening across the region?
Yeah, it does not vary that much, but again, it depends on what the tax level is for St. Lucia. For this current period, it's set at $250 for gasoline and diesel, but in earlier periods, it differed. But as I explained earlier, those countries, they have differences in cost structure. Their margins tend to be a bit lower. The taxes, some countries, the taxes are a bit higher. Like Grenada, for example. Grenada has stuck to a tax rate of $3 a gallon, and that has been existent, I think, somewhere from 2006. They have not wavered. They have kept it at $3, notwithstanding any escalation in prices. Okay, Grenada has what is called a true pass-through. Okay, it's a pure pass-through because they would keep the tax at a fixed amount in spite of what's happening globally in international oil prices. So, you know, so there would be differences, but on average, because it's something that we always do when we advise the cabinet with respect to price adjustment, we do the research in what's happening in the other countries, we get the latest prices for the various products for each of the islands, and we furnish cabinet with that information. And we also compare it with St. Lucia so that cabinet, you know, can make a decision based on the information provided.
When you look at the cost of petroleum products now from a historical perspective, for example, our gasoline and diesel, as a department, are prices moving at a rapid rate in terms of our increases, or do we see, you know, slow but modest increases over the time period? Because the price of oil seems to be very volatile. We are never too sure how the prices are moving, in what direction and when, except for this time around we have seen a decrease that seemed to be, you know, it has been sustained over a period of time. Right. But in terms of the movement of our prices, have our prices increased dramatically over the last 3-4 years as opposed to what it would have been prior to the modified pass-through mechanism? Yes.
Prior to the pass-through mechanism, well, let us go back even further.
Okay,
let us look at, because the pass-through mechanism in its purest sense was implemented effective 28th of September 2009. Okay, so you have the pass-through system, because what existed before that was a situation where the government was actually adjusting at the time it was called consumption tax. It was not excise tax, it was consumption tax. Excise tax only came on board around late 2009, early 2010. So there was an adjustment being made on average of about 10 times per month. It was a very tedious and burdensome exercise where we had to prepare cited instruments to adjust the excise tax rates, and that would be signed by the Minister for Finance. You know, that we published in the Gazette.
Why was it being
adjusted? And that was because the system that was being used then was not, it differed from what existed presently.
Okay.
As I explained earlier, right now we're using the CIF price, and that is obtained from customs, from the importers, etc. What existed before the pass-through, in other words, before September 2009, was what we call the main Caribbean posting. Now, the main Caribbean posting was basically a formula that was used throughout the Caribbean by most Caribbean countries to arrive at an average price for both gasoline and diesel. It's called mean Caribbean posting, an average posting. And that information was being furnished to the various respective governments, as I said, you know, 3-4 times a week. So there was a constant movement in the MCP, the mean Caribbean posting. And that was the basis for which the import price was being determined then. That system was not very transparent. No one really understood exactly how the figures were arrived at. You know, we would just, you know, getting the information. I mean, we would verify with the oil companies. It was actually supplied by the oil companies, but they themselves could not even provide us with, you know, a very thorough explanation as to how the figures were arrived at. So most countries throughout the region abandoned the MCP approach, and they are now using a similar approach that we have presently. In fact, just to inform viewers that the use of the actual CIF price started in January 2013. That's when we decided to move away from the MCP to using the actual CIF price. It's much more transparent, you know, and it is something that, you know, we can provide reliable information on. And there was less frequent changes.
Understood.
Okay, and just to answer your question, so going back before the main Caribbean posting, before the pass-through in September 2009, government was, I mean, the prices were being kept artificially low. The government was heavily subsidizing the cost of fuel. In fact, there was a situation at, for example, if you recall, and if viewers would recall, when international oil prices skyrocketed to about $140 a barrel. That was around June, July 2008. I think there's a slide on that.
Yes, yes, there is. In fact, because a statement was made to that effect by one of the former ministers, and he was saying that it boggles his mind why prices would be this high at above $13 when the price of the crude oil is so low, whereas when the price of crude oil was at its highest, the government was selling at a lower price. And so I'm glad you brought this up so that we can discuss it. If we can just get to that slide.
Yeah, if we can get to that slide.
Yes, it's slide number 7.
Very useful, number 7,
sure.
for the viewers to see.
So we can look at...
Right. Yeah. So this slide really shows what happened before the pass-through started in September 2009. What existed before was that government was heavily subsidizing the price of fuel to keep it low. As you could see, the second column, which says July 1st to the 15th, during that period, that's the period when international oil price was at its highest. The price at the pump was $12.75. And as you can see here, the excise tax / consumption tax was minus 1.30, meaning that government was paying the importers on average $1.30 for every gallon of gasoline sold in St. Lucia. So not only was government not earning any revenue on the sale of fuel, but they were actually paying the company on average $1.30 for every gallon of fuel sold. So this was very unsustainable in terms of the government fiscal position. It was putting pressure on the government expenditure, and government was earning in fact no revenue at all from the sale of fuel. So that system was not sustainable. Then, hence the reason we had to move away to the pass-through system.
Would you recommend that policy?
Before you continue, just to say that the moving to the pass-through system was something that was recommended by the Monetary Council of the ECCB from way back around 2005, 2006.
I think I read a report, a 2006 report to that effect.
The governments in the region decided to move into that system. So it's not like St. Lucia just decided to move into that system all by itself. It was a regional decision to do so.
Currently, do we have the capacity to subsidize fuel so that it could remain low at the pumps? Would that be something you would recommend from the Ministry of Finance?
The fiscal situation does not allow that at this point in time. And, government, would need to be able to generate revenue from fuel. And I mean, there are good economic reasons to generate revenue from fuel. I mean, fuel is something which it's used by a wide cross-section of the economy, but it is something which, there's a need for us to conserve, because viewers should also bear in mind that all the fuel that is consumed in St. Lucia is imported. We don't produce not one drop of oil in St. Lucia. All of it is imported. And therefore, the prices that is reflected at the pump has to in some way reflect the movement in international oil prices, given the fact that we are totally dependent on the importation of fuel.
Understood.
Okay, so there really has to be some level of taxation. Now, the $2.50, which is now charged per gallon of gasoline and diesel, is basically reflect what has been pronounced by the Prime Minister in his budget address in 2014, where he did announce that the government would be levying $2.50 a gallon on gasoline and diesel.
Which would mean that there are a number of projections and expectations.
Right. So the projection in the budget for this fiscal year is based on the $2.50. So it is very critical that the government maintain the $2.50 so that it can achieve its fiscal targets. Because we don't want a situation where the revenue is not performing, and government still maintains its expenditure levels and its obligations.
But that would be disastrous, given where we are already in our whole discussion on fiscal deficit and, finding ways to get out of the hole that we found ourselves in. But to go back to that whole discussion and to look at the price buildup, during that period when crude oil was extremely high. A former minister said that if crude oil was so expensive back then and we sold it at $12.75, if the crude oil is so low now, it should be lower. But we are seeing also that quite apart from the fact that the government was subsidizing the gasoline and basically paying the importers, you know, per gallon, we also had two other components that were lower. And we're talking about the company margin as well as the retailer's
margin. The margins were lower in 2008. They have since been adjusted upwards. So that would have accounted for the lower retail prices of those products. You know, government periodically, there's no fixed timeline, but periodically, both the retailers and the wholesalers would approach the government for margin increases, and these would be based on, you know, information that is provided in terms of the cost and so on, and the financial statements, etc. And there'd been negotiations process, you know, before, you know, the government would agree with the companies respect to the guaranteed margins. So you're correct. In 2008, the margins were indeed much lower, hence contributing to the lower prices at the pump during that period.
In terms of our prices on the international market, because the reality is that a lot of St. Lucians monitor the movement on the international market, not just of the crude oil, but, you know, international average prices as well as it relates to what we are asked to pay for at the pumps. From your recollection and information, do our prices at the pumps, not just in St. Lucia, but in the region, has it deviated that much? Is it always very far off from what is happening in the US and Canada? Because I get the feeling that most of us tune to CNN and we realize that consumers in the US are paying a certain amount for gasoline, for example. We do that conversion on our own and we multiply the US by $2 and
2.7
and 70 cents, and we say, but wait a minute, why is it that it's supposed to be this and we are paying a lower amount?
Well, you have to remember that in the US and perhaps Canada, the taxes on fuel are extremely low. In the case of the US, I think it's 18 cents a gallon. It's extremely low. You know, the Americans, they don't like taxes, so they always keep those things very low. Of course,
and there are other means of generating revenue.
Exactly. The US economy can't be compared with ours. And the US produces a significant amount of oil. You know, the shale oil, and there's oil from Alaska and so on. We don't. We don't produce not one drop of oil, so it's not comparable. We can't compare ourselves with the US. But just to answer your question, I don't know if you can look at the last slide, slide number 10, put it up on the screen. It shows the movement in international oil prices and the St. Lucia, the price of gasoline at the pump for the period 2008 to 2014. It shows a fairly close relationship between the two, except for the earlier period, that is from the first quarter 1 of 2008 to quarter.
This would have been when we were subsidizing
it. 2009. That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, as I indicated, the pass-through mechanism became effective at the end of September 2009. So before that, there was a huge variation between the movement in international oil prices and that of the retail prices in St. Lucia. But since the implementation of the pass-through in September 2009, we have seen a closure of that price variation, as you can see on the chart here, from about the third quarter of 2009, and it progressively became smaller going forward up to 2011 and so on. And you know, that's one of the main objectives of the pass-through mechanism. One of the main objectives for this pass-through mechanism is for the prices at the pump to basically reflect the movement in international oil prices. So that objective, to some extent, was achieved after the implementation of the pass-through system.
Understood. I know that we have been speaking for a while and there's a lot of information that has been presented to you, the viewers, tonight. Rest assured, the information, the slides would be available on the official Facebook page. It will be on the YouTube channel as well, so that you can access the information, so that you can be armed to make informed contributions to the whole debate and to the discussion. But Mr. Sergius, just before we break so that we can go to our callers, there is a question that I would like to ask. We are seeing right now that I believe the crude oil prices is about $45 US.
From today it was about $48.
About 48.
Yeah, it went up slightly, yes.
And so, despite all of what we have said, many St. Lucians are asking, when would we see that being reflected at the pumps?
Yes.
We understand that it is a modified pass-through mechanism, and we know that there is a calculation period. But when can St. Lucians expect to see some movement to the effect that we are seeing now on the international market?
So the next price change, based on the system that we have currently, is due on the 5th of April of 2015. Given the fact that the international prices remain low as we speak, compared with what existed last year, it is quite possible that we can see some further reduction in prices come the 5th of April. Obviously, we can't say by how much, because it depends on a number of variables. But if prices continue to remain low as they are right now, we expect further reduction in the retail prices of all the various products, all the various petroleum products at the pump.
Because we have been seeing that decrease reflected. For example, when we look at the CIF prices of gasoline, the 1st of October it was $10.16. By the 20th of October we had $8.55, and the reduction.
Been a consistent decline.
Yes.
In fact, based on information that we received, the importers of fuel have indicated that I think there was a shipment that came in early, the first week of January of this year. And based on the information available, the prices have gone down even lower. So that just goes to show that there is likely to be a further reduction for the next price change.
Of course, that is welcome news. As a motorist, I would welcome that as well. So we have been discussing a lot, and we have given you information as it relates to the current fuel prices in St. Lucia and what accounts for that price. I know a lot has been said in terms of the actual calculations and the build-up, but thankfully we have the Director of the Research and Policy Unit within the Department of Finance who was able to shed some light and to present the information to you, the viewers, as to what exactly it entails. Just before we break, there's one more question I'd like to ask you, because when we come back we'll be opening the phone line so that we can get the views of our callers and the questions and so on. How do you monitor, or how do you collect the information as it relates to the movement in the international oil prices? Because it changes daily, it changes so rapidly that I would imagine that there is some system in place, or there is some calculations or some formula that would allow the Department of Finance to get that information so that it can be used to advise the government, it can be used to, to calculate our prices and so on. How do you collect that information?
Yeah, well, there are various sources. I mean, this is information that is widely available on the internet. We normally use the U.S. Department of Energy as their website to obtain the information. They have provided daily prices, international prices of fuel. Now, there are different benchmarks. There's the West Texas Intermediate, which is the U.S. benchmark, and there's Brent crude, which is the European standard. When prices tend to be high, there tend to be a fairly wide variation between those two. The WTI, the West Texas Intermediate, tend to be lower. But now that prices are coming down, the variation between the two is very small, something like $3. But for us, the benchmark that is applicable for the Caribbean is the West Texas Intermediate, which is available, as I said, on various websites. There's Bloomberg, there is the U.S. Department of Energy, and there are various websites that actually gives you a series going back as far back as the early 80s on a daily basis in terms of international oil prices. So there's a rich source of information out there with respect to oil prices. And now when we prepare the memorandum to Cabinet, to advise Cabinet on the next price change. We do the research, okay, and we compile all that information from the various websites, and we actually, do graphical representations of the movement in the numbers for the period. We show a historic movement for the last 5 years, sometimes further back, and we do a very deep analysis of the movement in international prices so that Cabinet can be guided as to how prices are moving internationally, and to look at this movement in relation to the prices that is being recommended to the Cabinet.
Sure. We'll go to our commercial break. When we come back, we'll be putting the telephone number on the screen so that we can get your calls. You can contribute. You may have suggestions that you want to make, comments that you want to make, or further questions that you'd like to ask of my guests. So when we come back, we'll be taking your calls. Please stay in touch. Welcome back to In Touch, our first program for 2015. In fact, it's my first day back after vacation, and it feels great to be with you to shed some light on some of the discussions that we have been having over the past few weeks, and to focus squarely on the issue of fuel prices. Yes, it is a discussion within the broader context of the economy. As Mr. Juste explained a little earlier, there are consequences in terms of revenue and so on for the government as it relates to the fuel prices. We are about to take your calls, and so the telephone number will be placed on the screen. You can call in to join the discussion. The number is 452-7347. You may have a question that you want to ask of Mr. Juste, something that we may not have covered in our discussion. You can feel free to do so. Again, the number is 452-7347. We have our first caller on the line. Good night. Thank you for staying in touch.
Hello, yes?
Hi, good night.
Yeah, I want to get into the program.
Sure. You're live on air.
Yeah, okay. Put it down a little bit there for me, please.
Caller, are you there?
Hello, yes,
Yes,
I'm waiting.
Yes, you could go ahead with your contribution. You are on air.
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Sanj, good evening to Jadia and Mr. Sanjis.
Good evening. And Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you. Mr. Sanjis,
yes.
In the presentation that you gave there, you talk about the prices, but you don't talk about the volumes. Now, I want to know whether you have made your calculations on volumes as well, because you have volume and price,
right,
and there might be a difference. Wouldn't there be a significant difference in the price, the average price, which will be dependent on volume by price by company over a period of time?
Well,
very good question. Thank you, caller.
Yes, the volume of the various products would naturally determine the actual revenue. That is, because remember, all of those statistics that we have quoted, they are per unit. So obviously, to determine whether it's government revenue or whether it's the revenue of the importer or the revenue of the distributor or the dealers, that would be dependent on volume, as you indicated. So what we have done is to provide it per unit. So these are the unit costs, for example. Okay, so but as I indicated, naturally the volume would determine how much revenue is being generated by the importation of the fuel.
I hope that answered your question, caller. Good night. Sorry we've lost that call. Good night. Thank you for holding the line.
Good evening, Jadia.
Good evening.
And to your guest, Mr. Sanjis.
Good evening.
First of all, a very happy New Year to the both of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, to you
And same
as
to
well.
you.
Mr. Sanjis,
Yes.
thanks for your clarification and bringing some level of transparency on the current debate with respect to our local fuel prices. You did indicate that a cutoff point has to be established for use of the CIF on the imported price,
Yes.
correct?
That's
Yes.
correct.
Okay. Now, in your table, you showed one company's cutoff point at the 2nd of December and the other at the 17th, correct?
table. Oh, you're talking about the actual shipments.
That's right, the shipment.
Okay, yes.
Is correct?
No, for gasoline, one company's, well, that is based on the shipment, the actual shipment,
The shipment,
date,
that's
the date
right,
when
yes.
the fuel was delivered at the port.
Right.
Okay, so one company, is the last shipment
Was the
for the period
second.
was the 2nd of December,
And the other the
other was
17th.
the 12th.
The 12th.
The 12th
Yeah.
of December.
Okay, now, how is the cutoff point determined? Is it based on the last shipment of each company in the last month of each of the 3-month periods, or should it have been the last day of the month?
Thank you for that
And
question.
yeah, and
you have
I'm
another question? Sorry.
Yeah, and I'm asking as well. The 2nd as shown and the 17th, were they representing the last shipments in December for each company? Now, if not, we can well understand why people are saying that the price should have been perhaps below $12, below 13, perhaps 10, because the trend shows it's a decreasing trend.
Yes, it is
okay?
decreasing.
So if persons are actually using and inputting in their price structure the shipment, if there was one towards the end of the month, then ultimately the price would have been really low, perhaps about $9, $10. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution, caller.
Yes,
the cutoff point, how is it established?
Yes, the cutoff point, as we all know, it's a 3-month period. So we would look at the last shipment in the month. For example, so the 3-month period, that is October to December. So we look at all the shipments, we look at we do it based on the last shipment in the month of December. And in the case that based on the slides that we showed, one company's last shipment in December was the 2nd, and the other was the 12th of December. Okay, so because obviously there was no other shipment during this month, so that would have to be at the cutoff point. But obviously, if there was a shipment that came in during the last week of December, we would have taken that into consideration as well. So that basically is a very, very simple approach. It's based on the last shipment.
I believe some people, we have the changes actually would be reflected on the 12th. So for example, we change our prices on the 12th of January. However, if there were any shipments made first week in January, second week in January, it would not be reflected in this price because the cutoff point for the 3-month period was December. Right. I hope that clarified your question, caller. Good night. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, good night.
Good night.
And good night, your caller.
Good night.
My guest,
I'm just calling on the price of gas.
Yes.
I don't know why the opposition is making people believe like is the Labour Party. That's not good. Because when they was in power, people used to buy us 20 pounds cylinder, almost $40-something. And now they say like Kenny have to go. From the time Kenny come, people never pay a chunk of 20 pounds cylinder, $40. It's more poor people not using it.
It's heavily subsidized, I can tell you that. The government is actually paying
because they have people
so that
people that have the big tongue and they bring it back and they take small gas, the small one.
Yes.
And a lady tell me from the time Flambeau was in, she have a child that melted it, and it's thanks to Kenny she can buy pumper with the $200.
But the prices of the 100-pound cylinder decreased. It decreased significantly. I think over $20.
By over $20.
Over $20. So I believe now they would be reverting to the 100-pound cylinders.
But I don't know how guys saying how Jean-Marie lying, everything like that. But I cannot understand how Labour have to go.
I heard Honorable Guy Joseph's statements, and I was not surprised. I was not surprised.
Saying how everything like that. And thanks to Kenny, like I tell them, if you see Flobo get in power, you see that nice program, all the people will suffer. Because the people say, Bujay, she says, if you are not there, what I will do? Because I have a lady, she never sick, she have the sugar. And from the time I there, that never take the lady.
You on the nice program?
Yes, from the time it started, I'm proud to be a nice worker. I am proud to wear my uniform.
Very good. Very good
I
caller.
have my brother's children, and from the night, they just fast for and pouring. And from that night, I can buy a book for that child. I am proud to be a nice worker. Wherever neighbor have meeting, I'm in front.
I like
the nice help me a
passion.
lot.
Oh my goodness. That's
And
a
they
very
have more
passionate
flamboyant
caller.
than nice than labor.
Well, you see, we are a free and a fair country, and the government believes in providing opportunities for all. So it should not be based on which party you support, but every Sanusian should get an
But what I'm
opportunity
trying
to
to
work.
say, and what Spider saying, nice is not good. But I tell you, if you see Flabo, take from the time they will be, the first day, they will just finish with nice.
But
That's why the people praying and say, Monsieur, I prayed for Kenny. I don't want Kenny to go because if the nice finish, they die.
But
so
did you
nice
hear that?
Worker from Grossy Lake.
Wonderful. Did you hear the Prime Minister say that we are getting support from Albert to continue NICE for the next 2 years?
Yeah, but I was in the meeting at Compre.
Great.
And I said, Prime Minister, you can take 5% from mine.
Wow.
Because when I go, they tell me, they're so happy. I say, NICE will not stop. It's there until Kenny say it ends. But I'm proud to be a nice worker. Wherever I go, I carry my uniform. And I'm proud to say I'm a nice worker under Kenny.
Thank you so much for your passion.
And God bless you all. You're not going nowhere. 2016, Labour will be back in power.
Thank you very much, caller, for that vote of confidence. A very, very passionate caller. Good night. Thank you for joining us on our first program for 2015. Go ahead with your contribution.
Good night, Mrs. Emmanuel, and good night to Mr. Sergis.
Good night, sir. Good night.
Mr. Sergis, I listened to you carefully, both you and the host, and was hoping to really understand. But it seems that, the more transparent things get, the more difficult it is for people to see through it.
There are details, huh? Yeah.
On one hand,
a lot of figures.
On one hand, you're saying that, everything is static, the taxes and everything, and it is based on CIF and so on. And on the other hand, you're saying that, your department advises cabinet based on research, talking about West Texas model and stuff like that. I mean, that is very confusing.
Well, hopefully he can clarify it for you, because these were two separate issues. So let me just give you an opportunity to clarify, because this caller seems to be confused as to what actually goes into the prices versus the information that would be submitted to cabinet. Because you would have to, when that information is presented to cabinet, you would have to analyze the data to present information, scenarios, and options, because you're looking at fuel prices, but not simply fuel prices, but within the context of the economy. Policy measures, also projections, and so on, because you are concerned about the broader aspect, which would be the projections set out in the budget and so on. Yeah. So if you can simplify for our viewers.
Yes, so basically, as we indicated earlier, we have the modified pass-through that took effect from the 6th of August 2012. Now, under the modified pass-through, as opposed to the pure pass-through that existed a couple of years before, we have a situation where there may be adjustments to the taxes that is applicable to various fuel products.
Yes.
So that's where we would advise the government with respect to various options, various scenarios,
yes,
as you indicated, to to provide for the revenue needs of the government.
Right.
Because obviously the government has a budget, and in the budget there's revenue and there's expenditure. The government needs to meet its revenue targets. Now, the taxes on fuel forms a significant part of the government's revenue collection.
Yes.
So we would have to run the various scenarios with respect to the revenue targets and see and to advise the government, the cabinet as to, in the opinion of the Ministry of Finance, which one, would be best.
And also how much revenue we would generate if we use this option, how much.
I think a typical example, for example, is also the subsidy on the LPG.
Yes.
Okay, I mean, this might vary depending on the expenditure pressures that the government is under. In cases where there's need for example, if international prices are coming down, government may wish to consider a reduction in the subsidy. And the reverse is true. If international prices is going up, then they may wish to consider increasing the subsidy on LPG. So these are various options which we normally provide to the cabinet,
Yes.
and in their wisdom, they would make the right decision.
And hopefully, we have a slide 8. Hopefully, this can provide further clarification to our viewers as it relates to the movement of our excise tax on fuel. And we are looking at the one just before. There's a table where there's actually a breakdown. You would see, for example, in 2012, the average annual rate of excise tax was $1.63. You compare that to 2013, where you had the average excise tax on gasoline, which would have been $2. So it is, whereas now it is fixed because of the pressures and government, you know, is set to achieve a certain target. There has been instances where the excise tax has been adjusted and has been low, way lower than the $3, for example, where it was pegged between 2009 and 2010. And so this is a point that our viewers can consider as well. Good night. Thank you for calling. Hello. Good night.
Yes, you hear me?
Hello?
Hello?
Yes, good night.
Yes, good evening. I'd just like to know, can your guest elaborate again on the CF, what is it?
CIF.
CIF pricing, what is in it?
Sure.
He spoke earlier on taxation, and the last taxation, I guess, before the UWP, it was $3, and then it went down to 2 something.
Yes.
But out of that, to me, I gathered as if there were more taxations. I would just like to know if it was in the CIF.
Thank you, caller. I heard Alan Chastney said that, so it's another opportunity to clarify, some of the issues. Sure.
Another thing too, I wanted to know, is it possible that they can move it from maybe a 3 months to 2 months? Because I've been hearing about 1 month and 3 months, 1 month and 3 months. Is 2 months also a reality, or is it something that you cannot do?
Consider. Okay, sure. Thank you very much for that. CIF again, to explain what exactly is the CIF, and perhaps we should not say CIF, but we should give the full term so that citizens could understand what exactly is in it. How do we get that information on the CIF? Whether that CIF has anything to do with government at all. And the whole issue of taxes and hidden taxes.
Yes. So the cost, insurance, and freight is the cost that is borne by the importer. Okay, Sol and Rubis, these are the 2 main importers.
Yes.
So they would source most of the fuel products from Trinidad, from Petrotrain in Trinidad. That's the main company that is supplying fuel to the region. Now there is also now again the actual cost may depend on the source, because sometimes Petrotrain may not be able to supply a given quantity. There was, I think 2 years ago, there was a situation where Petrotrain was undertaking maintenance of the plant in Trinidad, and they had to source from I think the Virgin Islands or Antigua, you know, because Antigua has a huge storage depot. So sometimes there will be occasions where they would have to, you know, change the sources. But there's the freight as well, and of course, if they're able to source from Antigua, you know, the distances would be a little shorter, so the freight costs would be reduced, you know, depending on where it's coming from. And but the freight and the insurance, these things don't vary that much. They normally remain fairly fixed over a given period. What really changes is the actual cost for the product that they pay. Okay, so. And as we explained earlier, we showed a slide for the different CIF based on the various shipments. Now, I think the caller did mention about is an additional tax.
Yeah.
The other tax, and I did mention it in the first slide, was the service charge, and that is calculated at 5% of the CIF price, of the CIF value. So these are the 2 main taxes. In fact, these are the only 2 taxes that are.
And they are not hidden. They were placed on the screen so you can see what the actual CIF is, what the excise tax is, the service charge, and so this would give you the landed cost. And then you have to deal with the company margin. The company margin is $1.01 per gallon. You need to add it on to that landed cost, and it will give you the wholesale price. The retailers too, you have to deal with a margin to the retailers, which would give us the unit price. You did indicate that the only place at this point we could have any flexibility would be on the issue of the taxes. And there are further implications, there are further considerations that the government, of course, has to take and has to place on the table if we are to look at further adjustments in the excise tax. I think that the whole discussion on the fiscal deficit and the economy and servicing our debt, that is too recent for us to forget really where we are in terms of the performance of our economy and what is necessary to move us forward. But we go back to the phone lines. We've lost that caller. Good night. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening, Julia. Good evening to your guest.
Good evening.
Let me ask your guest. I'm not a mathematician, but if gasoline or diesel has to skyrocket back to the original price of $107 a barrel and use that very same formula, will we pay 15 cents for the gas? Because when I check it, if I have to use that very same formula you have there, and I have to bring it back as $145 a barrel, then we pay almost $20 for a gallon of gas down here, you know. So I'm asking you now, if gasoline has skyrocketed back to the original price of $145 or $150 a barrel, when we use that very same formula, will we pay 15 something for a gallon of gas?
Thank you for your question, caller. In terms of the formula, again, we see that many persons are working out the scenarios in their minds and trying to determine what the price would be at a particular point in time. But again, the prices are determined by the considerations of cabinets and so on. But do you see in St. Lucia, for example, as he said, if the price goes all the way up, that if we use this formula, we may very well be paying such a high price, God forbid. I really do not want to see the day when we would be paying $20 for a gallon of gasoline.
But, you know, I think there's a fundamental principle that persons must be guided by.
Sure.
And that principle, again, I repeat, is the fact that we don't produce fuel in St. Lucia.
Yes.
We are totally dependent on imported fuel. So I think people must disabuse their mind with the notion that, you know, they have to be in some way protected. I mean, it's the government's ability to continue to protect persons, consumers, for a product that we don't produce in the country is very limited, particularly, you know, given the fiscal situation. So I think, I mean, I'm really hoping that we don't ever reach a situation where oil prices exceed $100 a barrel.
Yes.
So, you know, from all indication, that may not necessarily happen anytime soon. So let us, you know, hope and pray that it's continue to remain low, as most analysts seem to agree that it will. But, you know, a government always has the option of adjusting the taxes,
yes,
to try to mitigate.
As
but
we
there's a
saw
limit.
was done in the past.
The point is that there's a limit to which government can do that, because obviously they need to generate some revenue,
yes,
to run the country.
Point taken. Good night. Thank you for calling in touch.
Bonsoir, Julia.
Bonsoir.
Yes. Moi, je dis comme ça.
Moi pas qu'à nous, ou pas qu'à parler assez fort.
Moi, je dis qu'on a monsieur Gaï et chasse avec Madame Saki Mikoua.
Dr. Gaylor Gobert.
Oui, c'est moi ça caché pour tuer le pays. C'est moi ça pour bosser pour conduire personne. C'est des arguments cachés. Bon, ça m'a fait explain between Alba et
Petro-Caribbean.
Oui, et Trinidad qui différence là-dedans.
Ok, merci pour la question ça, parce que moi j'attends mon dit que ça, pour nous payer, c'est parce que nous acheté l'huile Trinidad. Si nous achetons l'huile Amérique, ben nous achetons l'huile côté l'année plus l'huile pour y plus bas et puis cette lycée pas payer autant pour gaz. Moi quand ba Mr. Sergis une opportunité pour expliquer pardon qui manière puis l'huile a changé. Est-ce que nous jamais une situation côté Trinidad qui vend l'huile à yon puis et puis Amérique ni un l'autre puis eh ben l'huile c'est un bagage qui bien contrôlé so that on est toutes ces compagnies qui vendent l'huile à même prix. And so Mr. Shedis, the question is, if you go to Petro-Caribbean or if you go to buy your your fuel from America, or you go to buy your fuel from the Middle East, for example, will it be cheaper, or are the prices controlled so that no matter where you go, your changes would be reflected perhaps in your insurance, your freight, and so on? How does it work?
Well, there is a base price, and that base price is determined by the international prices, the West Texas Intermediate, for example, as I spoke of. And added to that base price, you have the various costs that might be unique for a particular supplier. So you have Petrotrain in Trinidad and Tobago. They are the major supplier to the Caribbean countries. Okay, they would their base price would be based on the international price, but they would have added their costs that are unique to them to that. So whereas it might be $60 on the international market, but Petrotrain would not sell it to you at 60 exactly, to be a few dollars more, because they have their own cost in addition to what the base price is.
But are there controls as to the maximum that it can be sold, or is that left totally up to the negotiations between the supplier and the...
Yeah. Because, I mean, we have had situations where, of course, we know there are two importers, and the two importers might pay a different price for the same product.
Okay.
Because they might be, and they might be sourcing from the same place.
Okay.
But there might be certain things that are unique to one importer that would determine the price he actually pays for the product. He might have larger volumes. He might have his own ship as opposed to renting a boat.
Okay.
His insurance might be different because he's able to negotiate based on larger volumes. Okay. So his rate of insurance per gallon might be different. So it may not be exactly the same. It varies depending on the circumstances of the importer. If you have an importer that is importing in large volumes as opposed to one that can only import in much smaller volumes, the larger importer would naturally benefit from lower economies of scale. So his unit cost would tend to be much lower.
Understood. Good night. Thank you for joining us.
Good night, Julia. How are you?
I am doing good. Thank you.
Okay, and good night to your guests as well.
Good night.
Okay, so I am very happy this evening that it is not somebody that we call a politician or government minister who is on In Touch tonight. I think that you have clarified everything that everybody has been asking about. One thing, though, that I'm not sure if you're in a position to ask. I heard a caller before me talk about the subsidies on the LPG cylinders. Would you be in a position to tell us if it were not for those subsidies? Because I come from a poor family. I'm sure the average solution, you talk to them and they're very relieved and they're very happy that after the cylinders have already been subsidized, that it has been lowered as well. Yes. So I just wanted to know whether you were in a position to say if those prices were not subsidized, how much would we pay for an LPG cylinder? Would you be in such a position?
Thank you so much, caller. Thank you.
Yes, caller. For the 20-pound cylinder, if it was not being subsidized, you'd have to pay about $47 for every cylinder. But $47 based on the current import price. Of course, that can vary depending on, as the import price varies. But based on the current price that we have, you'd have to pay around $47 a cylinder compared to $32.89 that exists currently. So it shows you that the subsidy accounts for about $14.30 for every cylinder that is sold.
Wow. Good night. Thank you for calling In Touch.
Yes, good day. Mr. Sergis, can you show us again the slide on the shipments? Just quickly, I just want to clarify something.
Sure. The slide on shipments, please.
Shipments, yeah, by the two companies.
Yes, let's just wait for the technicians to get on there. That is slide number 3. Number 2 or number 3? Yeah. Let's deal with number 2, the gasoline.
Yes. I note that in each month prior to December, in the case of Company A, there were 2 shipments. But in December, there's only 1.
That's correct.
And I would have thought that in December, the demand would have been higher and there would have been at least 2 shipments in keeping with the trend. For the other company, it looks like it's 1 a month. Okay, but be that as it may, I am looking at, I don't know, your calculation of the price and the different components using your average 3-month average price of 866, is it?
Yes, 866. Yes.
Let me tell you, I don't know if you're at liberty now, since this is an Excel spreadsheet. If you were to use, for example, hypothetically 750, how would that translate to the bottom price?
Sure, I'm sure he's able to
just
work
quickly.
something. Yeah, sure.
Just quickly,
Yes,
yeah.
You said 750? Did
750.
you
Use 750 in your price, yeah, as your average.
Yes, it would come down to about $12.43.
$12 and?
43 cents.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
You're welcome.
But this is just a hypothetical exercise.
Yeah, of course. I'm
we
sure
don't have any basis for
so all
changing
other
it to
things
750.
equal. So if we
Yes.
were to, hypothetically use 750 and all other things remain equal. Good night. Thank you for joining us on In Touch.
Good night.
Hello, good night.
My question is to Jada.
Yes, good
Who
night.
are the wholesalers that wholesaler bringing petrol into St. Lucia?
I think you can send that question across to Mr. Segis.
But why would you not know when you have your show?
Yeah, but I choose not to answer because there is someone who is... Yeah,
Let
sure.
Mr. Sanchez answer that.
Sure.
As far as I'm aware, there are two importers, the Sol and Rubis.
Now, all your graphs, you were convincing the people of St. Lucia that your wholesale price is so many dollars as you show on the graph. Where are the documents? If they're the wholesalers, where are their documents that you should be presenting to St. Lucians to show that the wholesalers say their landed cost is such and such? You are showing no documents from the wholesalers, but you only showing graphs from the ministry. So where are these documents to convince me that you did not cook your figures or you got your figures
you do
from
not
the
realistically
wholesalers?
expect me to get the invoices of the companies to make public.
You should have a letterhead. You should have a letterhead
realistically
from the
expect that, do
wholesalers saying you should have, because you should have a letterhead from the wholesalers saying that our price is such and such per gallon landed. That you should show. That's the kind of document you show to convince us, not documents that you make up in the ministry.
May I ask you a question?
Convince us that these are genuine documents.
May I ask you a question, please?
When you bring these documents to the people showing the letterhead of the wholesalers, then you can convince us that these figures are not...
So all that information is available at the Customs Department. If you wish to make an appointment with the Customs to verify it for yourself, you're free to do so.
But the Customs Department do not have all these markups, because the wholesaler would have, when you buy a thing as a wholesaler, you have the shipping cost, you have the insurance, you have all the costs it costs you as a wholesaler. Then you come out with a price.
No. Well, the company marginally sets
accurately because they are not the importers. So we need that information from the importer. Show us a document from the importers that this is what the landed price. Because my information has it that the landed price is $5.70.
When? As at what date?
When was that?
Show me, and if you can disprove
but you need to say as at what date,
from the importers that this is not so.
You need to indicate as of what date.
What was the date of the $5? Because this morning I heard Alan Chastney say $6, and now you say $5. So that must have been a shipment between this morning and tonight.
But it's very simple. Julians import goods. All companies import goods.
Yes.
They have their wholesale, they have their landed cost.
Yes, but when was that landed cost? What is the date of that shipment?
If you say so, bring documentation from the importers, the wholesalers, that this is what it is. Then you're convincing us.
Yes, but please.
Don't bring figures from the ministry saying to us that this is it for us to accept.
May I ask you a question if you care to answer?
Yes.
Did you serve in the cabinet of the United Workers' Party? You're a former minister, right?
That is irrelevant.
No, because I want to ask. No. I want to question you on the figures coming from the Ministry of Finance, because you are now questioning the figures and you are expressing no confidence in the information coming from the Ministry of Finance. I simply want to ask, when you served in the cabinet of the United Workers' Party, did you have any reason to doubt the information coming from the Ministry of Finance?
Jada,
were your decisions based on the information coming from the Ministry of Finance?
I am calling as a citizen of St. Lucia. I am saying to you...
And so you are disassociating yourself with...
have wholesalers. The wholesaler would give you that on a letterhead. If you can bring that letterhead to us, the people of St. Lucia, saying that, look, from the wholesaler, this is documented by the manager of the wholesaler, that this is my landed cost. Then we are convinced that this is the true landed cost.
And then
Until
I also
then, you have to prove that to the people of St. Lucia.
And you have the opportunity to disprove the information by presenting the invoice to show a landed cost of $5.60.
You have access to the wholesalers' information more than I do.
I would hope that the information...
on you to prove that.
I would hope that the information you just gave us there, that you did not just guess that figure, because the information that we have and the invoices from customs, as indicated by the official from the Ministry of Finance, indicated the various prices that are placed in that table. And so to say that the CIF was $5.60.
70 cents.
$5.70. At what date? Because we are dealing with a 3-month...
Yeah. You don't need to be a rocket scientist. You are not the wholesaler. The wholesaler would give us all the costs that he would incur in ordering petrol from wherever he orders to bring to St. Lucia. We are not the wholesaler. So does Julian's. When Julian's put up a markup on their goods, they would have and tell you what it costs them to land it. So let us see.
No, but the markup is set at $1.01.
That is the question to you. Bring out these documents. Let Mr. Juste bring out these documents stamped by the wholesalers. Then we are convinced that the landed price is XXX. That is what you have to prove to us.
Thank you very much for your contribution. And there is just so much that I want to say now, but I will resist the urge. And that landed cost of $5.70. It just convenes that there are some persons with an agenda that it does not matter what you say, it does not matter how you present the information, it would be rejected because it does not advance their own arguments. But back to the lines. Good night. Thank you for joining us.
Hi. Good evening, Julia.
Hello. Good evening.
I'm Mr. Juste.
Good evening.
Julia, welcome back.
Thank you.
Thank
you so much. Thank you.
Mr. Juste, you did a remarkable job in educating the St. Lucian public on this matter. I honestly feel disrespected, honestly. As a young person and as a St. Lucian, I believe Mr. Chastney has insulted my intelligence, and he should apologize to the public for deliberately misleading them on the gas prices. My question to you, Mr. Juste, had Mr. Chastney seeked further clarification on how the fuel prices at the pumps were calculated? Would the information be accessible to him? And is there such a difference between the calculation quarterly and 90 days? Because this system was introduced back in 2008, if I'm correct, when Mr. Chastney was a Minister of Cabinet. I'm baffled as to why now the calculation is such rocket science.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Had he, or did the leader of the United Workers' Party approach the Ministry of Finance or your department?
I don't know. I am not aware of any such individual.
But the question is that if he did approach, would the information be made available, or is
yes, it's public information. It can be made available to anybody who requests it.
Sure. Thank you for calling. Good night.
Yes, good night. How are you doing?
I'm doing good enough. Thank you very much.
Okay. I had to stop watching the program because I can't understand. I mean, it has been going on so sweetly, and for someone and ask for documents.
A former minister of government, who, when he served, never presented any information to the public. But that's for a whole other show.
What would cause me not to think that if whatever the person is asking for was presented, the person would not now ask for whatever the supplier, be it Trinidad or Jamaica, Because the person doesn't doubt what the local importer is asking for and would ask for something from the supplier. Why should not I believe that? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And again, I guess if you are calculating the excise tax per unit, per gallon, the higher the CIF price, then the tax that is collected would be higher at the end of the day.
Well, yeah, in terms of the service charge.
In terms of the service charge,
it's an ad valorem tax.
Yeah, it's 5% of.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct.
Good night. Thank you for calling.
Yes, good evening, JD.
Hello.
Good evening to your guest.
Good evening.
Yes, I recognize the caller before the last, if I have that right, as being the former minister.
Former Minister for Health.
Yes. Isn't it ironic that this former minister is very familiar with customs procedures on original invoices? He will know that all too well.
Yes.
Because the former minister himself believes that everyone is up to his own antics when he was a minister of government. But more than that, here you have a situation, and you were putting it right, that you are depending on information from the Ministry of Finance, the very same ministry that this former minister and the very same people that this former minister derived information from. It didn't trust the ministry, or is it that he himself is evading something he himself is guilty of? So that's when former ministers come, and he should be ashamed of himself.
I find it to be very disrespectful to the Ministry of Finance and their staff.
Precisely.
Because, yeah.
But I want to say more, that this former minister should be ashamed of himself, because if I were in his place, I would not speak on matters as it relates specifically to customs and invoices.
Or invoices.
And so on. He shouldn't do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, caller. This is why I said so much could be said, but I will, of course, resist the urge. Good night. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, good night to you, Julia.
Hello, how are you?
I'm all right. Good night to your guest as well.
Yes, good night.
Welcome back, Julia. Let me
Thank
start by
you.
saying welcome back. Welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, I stayed there and I just had to laugh, man. I just had to laugh at the former Minister of Health by his comment because, you know, but I don't want to go that line. But as the gentleman, your guest is sitting down here, and I'm looking at and I'm not seeing that that's a government minister who is sitting here giving us information and giving the public information, right? And that's what I'm very, very proud of. Because tomorrow now, people like Alan Chastney, in spite he's there, not wearing a political hat, he will still not believe any information that he's going to give.
Which is very unfortunate, which is very sad. Yes. And very unfortunate, because I really cannot understand how a former minister, it explains a lot of things given his own history, but it is very sad that persons who served in cabinet could be so, I really cannot understand basically, because they are saying to St. Lucians, to hell with the Ministry of Finance. Whatever these guys are saying to you, it is something they just thought of and put together in a document. So it means basically that all of the information in terms of the economic performances, it goes deeper than that in terms of our taxes, you know, our revenue and so on. It means all of that information, not just what we are giving you tonight, but what we base our whole existence as a country on should be questioned, and is wrong. And I just find that to be so disrespectful to the public officers, because these people work with absolutely no political agenda. They go in day in and day out and night too to collect information, to analyze data, to present information to the Cabinet of Ministers, information or, you know, recommendations that Cabinet is not forced to accept. Cabinet still has the authority to determine at the end of the day what policy decisions are made. And to make it seem as if the Ministry of Finance would come up with information simply to make the government look good or to make the opposition look bad is very ridiculous, because at the end of the day, the decisions are made by the Minister for Finance and the Cabinet of Ministers. And so if the former minister believes that by taking this route, he will be placing the burden of all of the wrongdoing and the misgivings and all of the misunderstandings and all of the nonsense that happened under the last administration on the public servants, on the Ministry of Finance, then it is extremely sad, because I believe people can see clearly a political agenda versus a state agenda versus what a department is doing simply because it is their duty to do so for their country.
Definitely, because I heard Alan Chasney wanted, 29th they're gonna match because of the gas prices, right? But now I'm overhearing him saying we're gonna match now because more information is being passed on to the public, and the public now have understood more about the gas prices and the way the gas prices has come, the way that it has been structured, and how government came about getting the prices. Now he's coming out and he's saying now, hey, we're gonna match because of the economic problem. Because most St. Lucians are educating themselves. Now, so they have kicked themselves in the butt because now they could have. But as which I'm just listening tonight again, let me go back to the information that I gathered from tonight, saying the truth has come out. But now when the truth has kicked them, now the former minister is asking for invoices.
And it's a shame, because yesterday they were asking for actual CIF prices and dates. Today, the leader of the United Workers' Party say, well, you're just giving us an average CIF price. Why don't you show us the CIF price on particular dates? And that information was presented tonight. And so it has not suited their agendas, so they have gone further. But the United Workers' Party, through its agents, can make a request to the individual importers. They can make a request to the Customs Department and say, hello, may I have access to this information? I am sure the Prime Minister would be more than happy to accommodate such a request.
Definitely.
Thank you so much for your contribution, caller. It was a pleasure speaking to you. Good night, you're on the air. Our final call. Hello, good night. We've lost that call. We've gone way beyond our discussion. I look at my watch and it's, wow. And you can expect that once you are having a discussion like this and information is being presented, that it would pique the interest of many persons and that questions would be asked. I want to thank you, Mr. Juste, for agreeing to be on the program. I know that you understand that as a public officer, as a director of the Research and Policy Unit, that once information is presented, as an economist, once you present information that other people do not quite agree with, they find ways to undermine the information, to ask questions. But I am very sure that the majority of our viewers really appreciated the information because they simply did not understand what exactly was this modified pass-through mechanism. How did we arrive at the CIF prices? Because we have been hearing so much about guessing and so on. You know, what are the other components of that price, which is something that is very critical. Because when we give the fuel prices, the retail prices to the consumers, we simply say that there is a movement from one price to the next price. I believe this is the first time that the Ministry from Finance has really broken that down so that people can see what they are paying and what is going in. And so I really must commend you and your department for that level of transparency in coming squarely with the public and saying, listen, this may not be what you want to hear. You may want to hear a CIF price of $5.70, but unfortunately, the CIF price for that period was $8.66. And so I thank you so much for that. And even before I give you the opportunity for your closing remarks, I just want to tell you too, that even from this alone, the fuel prices, I understand that your department really on a daily basis would be faced with so much pressure in terms of collating information and more so analyzing the information, because a lot of us can read, but not many persons can break it down and understand and present the scenarios. So your final words as we prepare to close the program.
Yes, Jade, I would just like to thank you for providing me with the opportunity to share the information with the public. As you correctly indicated, I believe that if persons are denied information, they are left to speculate. And oftentimes when people speculate, they come to the wrong, without the proper information, they come to the wrong conclusions. So it's very important as public officers for us to educate the public, particularly on an issue like gas prices that affects a wide cross-section of the society. I mean, the ordinary man on the streets,
Everybody.
the students, you know, the civil servant, the professionals, everybody is affected by fuel prices. So it's very important that they understand the process involved in determining fuel prices. So again, I would like to thank you for providing this opportunity, and I believe that as public officers, we need to make use of the media a little more to educate the public, because you know the information is very critical, because without proper information, we'll come to the wrong conclusions, and there's also misinformation out there, which you know is not very good for the country. So it's important that persons are educated, and they come to they make the right decisions based on solid information.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Mr. Sergis, and I want to thank you for tuning in to Choice for our first edition of In Touch for 2015. By all indicators, it will be an exciting year. There will be many opportunities to discuss a wide range of issues. Of course, you can expect that we will be getting information not just from the policymakers, but from the technocrats as well, because they are involved in the day-to-day processes of governance. They are not simply the implementers of policy that has been set by the government of St. Lucia, but they also drive and also direct policy through, just as explained by Mr. Sergis, their research, their knowledge, their technical capacities. We must understand too that when we think of the Ministry of Finance, and this is an issue that came up when we were discussing wages and salaries back then, persons were asking, well, why is it that you have, you know, a higher bracket in the Ministry of Finance? These are skilled, qualified individuals. Many individuals who invested so much time, money, and energy into educating themselves, ensuring that they are able to come back to make a contribution to St. Lucia. And so it is, of course, very, very unfortunate that we had a former Minister of Government tonight taking up that tone and questioning not just the information that was presented tonight, but the integrity of our public officers, the integrity of our Ministry of Finance. But rest assured, there'll be more opportunities to discuss issues like this. We'll be back next week, Monday, with another edition of In Touch. And rest assured, it will be just as informative and exciting. Good night and have a very productive week.